Coalition of Human Rights Defenders is a network organization of close to 161 national and subnational organizations working to promote human rights. Our main mandate is to ensure coordination of human rights defenders for the purposes of their protection. Human rights defenders raise very critical issues in society. They are the ones that are addressing issues of corruption, gender-based violence. They are the ones who are raising questions of access to justice. They are the journalists that are reporting sensitive investigative stories. So of course, because they are working to challenge the status quo, it puts them in brushes with state security agencies, the Uganda Police Force, security agencies, RDCs, etc. And over time we've seen an increasing narrowing space for civic space here in Uganda. Recently we've seen the suspension of 54 NGOs for various reasons by the regulator, the NGO Bureau. We've also seen increasingly restrictions to freedom of assembly, expression, etc. As we speak now, one of the mediums of communication, Facebook, is closed. You get it, which is a big aggregator for information, especially because we have a very young population here. So increasingly, we continue to see a narrowing space for human rights defenders, and that means, in essence, that our relevance as a coalition that seeks to protect human rights defenders becomes more prominent in these times. And processes like the Universal Periodic Review are very critical, because once the national spaces sort of shrink, it's important to take our advocacy to regional level, and that's at the East African Court of Justice, the African Commission on People and Human Rights, but also at international and global level, where Uganda has made commitments, and that's the UN Human Rights Council. Therefore, that's what situates the Universal Periodic Review mechanism, and that's why it's important for human rights defenders to increasingly argument and prepare their reports in the lead up to Uganda's Universal Periodic Review in January. Presently, we are coordinating what we call the Civil Society National Stakeholders Forum on the UPR. It is a loose coordinating agency for civil society meaningful participation in the UPR process. And it's hosted at our organization, and it is structured. It has a membership of close to 300 grassroots and national organizations. It is structured under 22 thematic areas. And I can mention a few. Those 22 thematic areas arise out of the previous recommendations. In 2016, when Uganda was last reviewed, close to 143 recommendations were handed down to Uganda that touch a broad spectrum of rights. And some of the issues that were raised were Uganda's aligning international human rights obligations to its domestic legal framework. You get it. For example, putting in place a very clear national action plan on human rights, a national action plan on business and human rights. You get it. Reforming specific laws which, in their view, they felt were not in consonance with international obligations that Uganda has signed up to. For example, the Public Order Management Act, review of the NGO Act, etc., etc. Cases where we've seen actual violations, like in the last 3 elections, we've seen targeted attacks to journalists covering elections, both the pre, the during, and post-electoral environment. But we don't see perpetrators of those violations being held accountable. So there were recommendations for the government to take action. You get it? Now, in 2021, the review that was postponed to early 2022, it will be an assessment review. Since 2016, in the 143 recommendations that you accepted, what have you been able to do as a country? Government has submitted its report. It submitted its report on 21st October. Civil society submitted its stakeholder reports on 15th July this year. Uganda will send a delegation on January 22nd to respond to some of the issues that it raised in its own state report. So there's an expectation that the UN office here in Uganda will also submit its assessment on the human rights situation, but also other stakeholders can submit their reports in that respect. This review is happening on the onset of COVID. You get it? So we've seen questions of finance and accountability. We've seen questions of the government's commitment to right to health. You know, the many unanswered questions. You get it? So we're making strong recommendations in that direction. We're also seeing concerns in as far as climate and environment is concerned. You get it? More than ever, climate change and environmental rights are a concern. Now, what remains is for us to work with media like yourselves to continue creating awareness on the UPR so that we bridge the gap. You get it? Because there's a huge disconnect between the citizens and the process.